flight from Vancouver landed 40 minutes early, and for a second I thought maybe the universe was finally cutting me a break. I'd been in Vancouver for 4 days, a policy conference for the firm, the kind where you shake hands with people you'll never see again and pretend the canapes are worth the flight. My husband knew I was coming home Thursday. It was Tuesday night. I almost texted him from the airport. I had my phone open, his name right there. And then I thought, I'll just surprise him. He'd been stressed lately. Work pressure, he said. I figured walking through the door with takeout from that Thai place on Queen Street might be the nicest thing I'd done for us in months. I took the UP Express into Union, grabbed a cab, stopped at the restaurant. Normal Tuesday. Nothing about that night felt like the kind of night that cracks your life in half. Our house is a semi-detached in Leslieville. We bought it 3 years ago when the market still made a terrifying kind of sense if you had 2 incomes and no kids yet. My husband handled most of the paperwork. He's good at that, the logistics of things, the spreadsheets and the mortgage calculators. I trusted him with all of it. That's the part I keep coming back to. I trusted him with all of it. I remember putting my key in the lock and noticing the lights upstairs were on. That was odd. He usually works at the kitchen table when I'm away. He likes the island, spreads everything out. The bedroom light doesn't go on until 10:30 at the earliest. It was barely 8. I set the takeout bags on the hall bench, quietly, for no reason I could name. The stairs in our house creak on the 3rd step and the 7th. I grew up in a house with creaky stairs, so I knew how to avoid them without thinking. Left side, 3rd step. Right side, 7th. I did it automatically. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me already knew and just needed my feet to confirm it. The bedroom door wasn't fully closed. There was a strip of light along the floor and I could hear voices. 2 of them. And then just sound. The kind that doesn't need explaining. I stood in the hallway for what felt like a very long time. I think some women would have kicked the door in. I've read those stories online, the ones where she throws his clothes off the balcony or confronts them both in the bed. Part of me understands that impulse completely. But I'm a paralegal. I've spent 6 years watching people walk into courtrooms with feelings and walk out with nothing. Feelings don't win. Evidence wins. I took out my phone. I opened the camera. I stood there in the hallway of my own house, in the dark, and I recorded the sounds through the gap in the door for 43 seconds. Then I went back downstairs, step 7 right side, step 3 left side, and I sat on the kitchen floor with the takeout bag still on the bench, and I didn't make a single sound. I didn't cry until I was in my car, parked 2 blocks away, engine running. I drove to my sister's place in Scarborough. She lives in a 2-bedroom with her boyfriend and a rescue greyhound named Francis, who immediately put his long, sad head in my lap, which is the only reason I didn't completely fall apart. I told her what happened. She wanted to call him right then. She wanted to drive back to our house and, she said a lot of things. I asked her to make me tea instead. She made tea. I sat with Francis and I thought about what I needed to do. Here's what nobody tells you about finding out. The shock doesn't last as long as you think it will. An hour. Maybe 2. And then something colder takes over. Something that starts asking very practical questions. Whose voice was that? I hadn't recognized it. I'd only heard fragments, the parts that made clear what was happening. But I didn't know the voice. Which meant either it was someone I'd never met, or someone whose voice I'd never heard sound like that. I called in sick the next day, first time in 2 years. I went home in the morning when I knew he'd be at the office. I packed a bag, not a dramatic bag, not everything, just enough for a week. I also did something else. Something I'm not entirely proud of, but I'm also not sorry for. My husband uses the same password for almost everything. I've told him this is a security risk for years. He always weighs me off. So I opened his laptop, which was sitting on the kitchen island, exactly where he always leaves it, and I looked at his email. It took me less than 4 minutes to find what I was looking for. Her name was in the calendar, invites going back 8 months. Little things, coffee, lunch, a Tuesday evening that he'd marked client meeting. The email thread was less ambiguous. A lot less. The kind of emails where you find out not just what someone is doing, but who they actually are when they think no one is watching. She was his colleague. They worked at the same firm. She'd been at our wedding. She was in the photo on our refrigerator from the firm's Christmas party 2 years ago, standing 3 people to his right, holding a glass of mulled wine. I photographed every email on my phone. I logged out of his account. I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it. Then I sat at the kitchen island, his kitchen island, where he does his spreadsheets, and I called a family lawyer. Not the one our friends used when they separated. A different one. One nobody we knew had ever met. I did not go back to my sister's. I went to a hotel on King Street. The kind that's more functional than fancy. The kind where the front desk doesn't ask questions. I paid for a week on my personal credit card. The one that's only in my name. The one he doesn't have access to. I'm a paralegal. I've seen enough. The lawyer I found was good. She was the kind of woman who listens to the whole story before she says anything, and then when she does speak, every word has a purpose. She explained what I likely had rights to under Ontario family law, the matrimonial home, equalization of net family property, potentially spousal support given our income gap in the last 2 years when I cut my hours to manage the household renovations he'd wanted. She also told me something I hadn't asked about but needed to hear. Don't move anything. Don't close any accounts. Don't tell him you know. Not yet. I didn't. I went back to the hotel. I ordered room service. I watched 3 episodes of a show I'd been meaning to watch for a year. I cried once, briefly, in the shower, and then I was done with that for a while. My husband called that evening, cheerful, asking when I was getting home from Vancouver. I told him my flight had been delayed, that I'd rescheduled for Thursday as planned. He said he missed me. He said it exactly the way he always said it. With exactly the way he always said it. With exactly the right amount of warmth. That's when I understood that this was not a mistake. This was not a moment of weakness. This was a practice thing. A fluent thing. 8 months of calendar invites does not happen by accident. I spent 2 more days at the hotel. My lawyer filed preliminary paperwork. I met with her once more in person, brought the photos I'd taken from his laptop, played her the audio recording from the hallway. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You're well prepared." I told her I work in law. She said it showed. On Thursday, I went home as planned. I came through the door at the time I was supposed to, with a bag from a coffee shop because that's what I'd normally bring back from a trip. He was in the kitchen. He hugged me. He asked about the conference. I answered. I ate dinner across from him and told him about the panel discussion on housing policy, and he told me about a project at work. And I nodded at the right moments. I have no idea how I did it. I still don't. We went to bed at 10:30, same as always. He was asleep in 15 minutes. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the house we bought together, thinking about net family property equalization and the mortgage statement I'd photographed on his laptop. I gave myself 1 more week. I needed 1 more piece. The recordings and the emails were strong. But my lawyer mentioned that if he contested, things could get complicated. I wanted uncomplicated. I wanted the kind of case that ends in mediation, not litigation. I wanted out cleanly, with what was mine, without spending the next 2 years in courtrooms. So I waited. I watched. I didn't have to wait long. The following Tuesday, he said he had a late client meeting. I said, of course, no problem. I'd probably be in bed by the time he got home. He kissed my forehead and left at 6:30. I got in my car, and I followed him. I know how that sounds. I'm a paralegal, not a private investigator. And I'm aware that following your spouse is not exactly dignified. But I also knew enough to stay far back, to park half a block away, to use my phone camera at maximum zoom. He went to a wine bar on Dundas West, the kind of place with low lighting and a small menu, the kind of place you take someone you don't want to be seen with by anyone you know. She was already there when he arrived. I photographed them through the window for approximately 6 minutes, long enough, clear enough, time-stamped. I drove back to Leslieville, and I was home before him, in my pajamas, reading a book I wasn't actually reading. I called my lawyer the next morning. She said we were ready. We served him on a Thursday. His own day off, he always takes Thursdays in the summer. Calls it his flex day. He was in the backyard with a coffee when the process server knocked on the front door. I know this because I was parked across the street, and I watched him walk around the side of the house to see who was there, and I watched his face when he took the envelope. I was already gone by the time he looked up. He called me 17 times over the next 3 hours. I answered on the 18th. He cried. He said he didn't know what had come over him. He said it was a mistake, that it had been going on, but it was over, that he'd ended it. And then he caught himself because he'd said ended it, which told me everything about how over it actually was. He said we could fix it. He said we had so much. He said a lot of things. I let him say all of them. When he was finished, I said, "The separation agreement is with your lawyer. Please have them contact mine." I hung up. My sister cried more than I did when I told her it was done. She kept saying she was so sorry. She should have done something. She should have seen something. But there was nothing to see. He was a man who was very good at being two things at once. That is not a failure of her attention. It is a quality he developed on his own, over time, for his own reasons. The house sold 4 months later. We'd agreed on the sale as part of the settlement, split the proceeds after the mortgage, straightforward. The day the sale closed, I was at my sister's, eating pasta she'd made and watching Francis try to fit his entire body onto a love seat, clearly designed for a much smaller dog. I got a notification from my bank. I looked at it for a moment. I put my phone face down. My sister asked if I was okay. I told her I was getting there. The part I haven't told yet is the part people always ask about when I tell the story, because there's a version of the story where I found out, grieved, lawyered up, and left. That's a hard story. That's also a fairly linear story. But this one has a different beat in the middle. About 3 weeks after I served him, I got a message on LinkedIn. Not a platform I use much anymore. Mostly just for professional contacts. The name was unfamiliar at first. And then I looked at the profile photo and I recognized her. His sister. She lives in Calgary. We'd met at the wedding, briefly, and once at a family dinner 2 Christmases ago. We weren't close. We'd exchanged maybe 6 sentences total across those 2 meetings. Her message said, "I know this is strange. I'm sorry for what you're going through. I'd like to speak with you if you're willing." I almost ignored it. My lawyer had advised me to limit contact with his family. But something about the message felt different from what I expected. No defensiveness. No, I'm sure there are 2 sides. Just, "I'm sorry, and I'd like to talk," I replied. We spoke on the phone for 2 hours. She told me she'd known about the affair for 3 months before I found out. He'd confided in her, not out of guilt, she said, but because he needed someone to manage the logistics. He'd asked her to cover for him twice, once for a weekend trip he told me was a work retreat, once for an invoice he needed explained away. She'd refused both times. She'd told him he needed to stop. He hadn't. When I served him with the separation papers, he called her first. Not to confess or to ask for help. To ask her to call me. To put in a word. To smooth things over. She didn't call me on his behalf. She called me for herself. "I should have told you sooner," she said. I kept thinking he'd stop. I kept thinking it wasn't my place. And then I realized my silence was a choice too. She told me she was willing to provide a written statement if my lawyer needed it. She said she had the text messages from when he'd asked her to cover for him. She said she understood if I didn't trust her, given whose sister she was. I trusted her. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did, and I was right to. Her written statement went to my lawyer the following week. It wasn't needed in the end. The settlement reached mediation without going further, and he didn't contest the terms once his own lawyer reviewed what I had. But knowing she'd offered it meant something to me that I still can't fully articulate. She chose the true thing over the easy thing. In a situation where the easy thing would have been to stay quiet, stay out of it, Let her brother manage his own mess. She chose differently. I think about that a lot. I think about what it costs a person to do that, and I think about how rare it actually is. We still talk occasionally. Not often. A message here and there, a meme she'll send about something we both find funny. It's a strange kind of friendship, built on the wreckage of something neither of us chose. But it's real. It's one of the realest things that came out of all of this. My husband and I finalized everything in February. 7 months from the night I stood in my hallway with my phone recording silence and sound, and the end of something I'd built my life around. 7 months is not a long time, and also it is the longest time, depending on which part of it you're living. I'm in a 1-bedroom apartment now in the annex. I can walk to 3 good coffee shops and a park where dogs are off-leash in the morning, and sometimes I go just to watch them, which is something I never had time for before. I am 33 years old, and I know things I didn't know at 32, and not all of them are bad things. I know that I can sit in a hotel room alone and order room service and not fall apart. I know that evidence matters more than feelings, but feelings matter too, just in a different order than I used to think. I know that sometimes the person who tells you the truth is the last person you expected. The Thai takeout sat on my hall bench for 2 days before I threw it out. I didn't think about that until much later. That I'd bought dinner for a life that was already over, and I'd just been the last to know. I don't order from that place anymore, not because it's painful, just because I found somewhere better. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the night in the hallway, not the hotel room, not the day the papers were served. It's a smaller moment than any of those. It's sitting on my sister's couch with a greyhound's head in my lap, and realizing that the anger had already started cooling into something quieter and more useful. I think that's the thing nobody really talks about when they tell betrayal stories. Everyone wants to know what you did. Nobody asks what you decided not to do. I decided not to blow up his phone. I decided not to confront her at the wine bar. I decided not to say anything at dinner that Thursday night when he asked me about the conference, and I answered him like nothing had shifted. Those decisions, the ones made in silence, in hotel rooms, in parking lots 2 blocks from my own house, those were the ones that actually mattered in the end. My husband was not a stupid man. He was a careful man who had stopped being careful because he'd never once had reason to think I'd look. That's a specific kind of arrogance, and it has a specific kind of consequence. Not punishment exactly, just the natural result of a choice meeting its own weight. He built something in secret for 8 months, and it came apart in 7. His sister made her own choice too. She'd known for 3 months, and she'd spent those months hoping the problem would solve itself, the way people do when the right thing and the easy thing are pointed in opposite directions. When they finally stopped being pointed the same way, she picked the right one. I don't think that was easy. I think it cost her something real within her family. And I think about the kind of person it takes to absorb that cost, without making you feel like you owe her for it. She never once made me feel like I owed her. She just said, I should have spoken sooner. And then she did what she could when she could. That's what I'd call integrity, not the dramatic version, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind that shows up quietly in a LinkedIn message and says I'm sorry and means it without needing anything back. I was 32 when I stood in that hallway and 33 when I signed the final documents. In between, I learned that clarity is not the same as coldness. That keeping your head doesn't mean you're not hurting. That the most important decisions I made during those 7 months were not made in anger. They were made in hotel rooms with room service and a legal pad and enough stillness to think straight. I also learned that you don't get through something like this by being tough in the way people mean when they say that. You get through it by being honest with yourself about what you actually know, what you actually need, and what you're actually willing to do to protect it. That's not toughness. That's something closer to knowing your own mind and trusting it even when everything around you is trying to make you doubt it. Francis the Greyhound still fits exactly 1 paw onto my sister's Louis seat. Some things stay constant. You hold on to those.